My name is Eric Sprague. I'm with American Forests, and along with the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, Diana Tomback, and the Forest Service, led by David Guaze. We are co-hosts for you, and we're excited to have you here. It's so exciting to see so many people here. I think it's another data point in the passion that this tree and ecosystem inspires in all of us. So thanks for coming. We're excited to be here. Today formally kicks off the process to develop a national core area restoration plan for Whitebark pine across its range. The first day was really designed to bring leadership and people who are pretty new to the issue up to speed on the challenges we're facing, all the great work that you've been doing for decades, and also a chance to look at the importance of whitebark across the ecosystems that you can find it out here in the West. The second and third days, Wednesday and Thursday, really shifts a little bit, and we'll be more rolling up our sleeves and getting to work on how in the world are we going to bring this restoration plan together. What is a priority? What is a core area? Should some things be weighted higher than others? And really get into a lot of the questions that are going to come up today and throughout this workshop. You're going to hear a lot of doom and gloom throughout today. You know this. In many ways, the whitebark pine face an unprecedented set of threats, but there are an unprecedented set of people in this room too. So I feel hopeful, and I think throughout this workshop, let's keep reminding ourselves that we can do this, we know what to do, we just need to coordinate on our storytelling, fundraising, et cetera, and we can get the job done. So logistics, the Forest Service, I got a little tip, needs to know where exits are. So exits are right out here to your left in the main foyer. Restrooms right here as well. We've got coffee and refreshments all day in the back. At 10:25, we'll have a break with light breakfast foods. Today for lunch and tomorrow for lunch, we'll be over here in Salon D. The reception tonight will also be over here. We're lucky enough to have the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe here to talk to us at the reception too, so that'll be a good event, so don't miss that one. But let's get things going. We'll start off with Joe Alexander, the Region 1 Director of Recreation, Lands, Minerals, Heritage, and Wilderness. Did I get it all? I think so. Thank you, Joe. Come on up.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here. Really appreciate the time here. This is an issue that's kind of near and dear to my heart, even though I've shifted gears and find myself in a new position today. There will be discussions around wilderness and what we do with whitebark pine and wilderness this week here. So it is still something I'm involved in, but my experience in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem really drove this issue home for me. The species that are dependent on whitebark pine are countless, and we had a lot of energy, a lot of effort. Was really impressed with the amount of professionalism and passion around whitebark pine. We had, when I served as a chair for GYCC, we had 11 subcommittees, and the whitebark pine subcommittee was always one that seemed to produce and to really be functional, and it was just really a tribute to the employees that worked on it. So really fantastic effort. I'm anxious to see kind of what comes out of this. I know we're kind of looking at a broader scale now, need to think bigger, but I think some of the efforts and some of the successes that we've had at the smaller scales or individual ecosystems are going to go a long ways to help us figure out what to do at the larger scale. So really happy to be part of that. Today I have the honor of introducing to you Alan Rowley, who our regional forester couldn't be here this morning to introduce Alan, but we're lucky to have him here in Missoula, and also want to welcome you to Missoula and to the northern region. But Alan is our Director for Vegetation Management, Rangeland Management, and Vegetation Ecology. Alan's no stranger to Region 1. He was a Deputy Forest Supervisor on the Lewis and Clark National Forest. He's worked at the district level, the forest level, the regional level, and now the national level. He's somebody that I worked for when he was deputy on Lewis and Clark, and really gained a great deal of respect for him. He has 34 years of public service, graduated from the University of Montana, University of Idaho, and is with us here for this conference. We're very lucky to have him. And Alan, it's a great pleasure. I've always enjoyed working with you, and thought that a real standout for Alan that I saw that what differentiated him with other line officers was that his passion, he got to the ground. I've never worked with the line officer that went out at his level and really got out on the ground to see what was going on. He really understood the issues from that level. And on the weekends, he'd spend his own time out there poking around and learning the issues firsthand, whether it was travel management or veg management or whatever. He's someone that I learned a great deal from, and has a great passion for vegetation management, and particularly the species. So without further ado, Alan, come on up.
Thanks for that kind introduction, Joe. I'm pretty sure a bunch of that was off script, because that's not what I wrote, and mine was much shorter. So thank you. So what a pleasure it is to be here. As Joe pointed out, I've been in the northern region in this corner of the world before, and certainly do appreciate it, and still when I get a chance to recreate, this is a place I often come to. Deputy Chief of the National Forest System, Leslie Weldon, could not be here today. She was invited and originally asked to attend. She sends her regards and regrets for not being here. What I find the rest of the story is she is at a conference back east on large landscape restoration efforts. And so a similar theme, just a different audience in a different time zone. Deputy Chief Weldon is a strong supporter, encourager, and I would say champion for whitebark pine restoration. And she's asked me to represent her in terms of the opening remarks. I'd also say, looking out across the crowd, it is positive to be here, to see so many interested people from non-governmental organizations, from tribes, from state agencies, and from federal agencies, all with the same interest here about whitebark pine. So I look forward to the summit and welcome you here, and look forward to the positive energy and future outcomes or future actions I hope will come from this. So let me start with, or continue with, wherever your arc in the relationship with whitebark pine is, where it started or where you are. Some of you may have encountered whitebark pine in a large, tall, large diameter, almost park-like stand with big whitebark pine and an understory grouse whortleberry and sedges and beargrass. Some of you may have encountered whitebark pine as some lone, craggy-looking individual on a ridgetop with might be more a metaphorical act of defiance than it even grows there, right? So wherever you started, in whichever one of those stands or characters you first saw or is your memory, I describe this with whitebark pine as like a lot of other relationships. The longer you stay in it, the more complicated it becomes. More complex in terms of realizing the phenotypes we see with whitebark pine, that big, large tree in the lake basin, or the scraggly one on the ridgetop. More complex in terms of the ecosystem that it exists in terms of relationships with whitebark pine, relationships with black bears and grizzly bears, relationships with red squirrels. I saw a picture of a black bear legally harvested in the early 70s coming out of the Mission Mountain Range, which is not too far from here. And the paws of the black bear were covered in pitch from its foraging in whitebark pine in the high elevation part of the Missions. So there's a story and a connection that's one of those can reach out and touch you like, whoa, that's not theoretical. Look at that. This bear's been living on whitebark pine nuts for a long time here. Other connections with red squirrels and soil stabilization, or more nuanced connections like what role it might have in snow accumulation and snowmelt regimes. more nuanced in terms of the aesthetic appeal that whitebark pine brings to the landscape, whether you're talking about the high country of the Anaconda Pintlers or the Bob Marshall or the ski resort that you'll visit tomorrow afternoon. Again, nuanced and value that it brings to the ecosystem, as well as nuanced relationships with fire, the rate of fire spread, fire severity, connections to climate change, water supply, and a whole host of other issues. So with this deeper understanding of the complex relationship, our conservation efforts and restoration efforts are really not about a single species. Yeah, it's one we can anchor to and we can leverage by working on the single species. It's really about the whole ecosystem in a complex. And this ecosystem and complex I describe as in some peril from a mix of threats, be it warmer, shorter winters facilitating larger bark beetle outbreaks, the long-term cumulative effects of white pine blister rust, fire exclusion with its many impacts of reducing the microsites for regeneration to the fuel accumulation to leading to more severe fires in the high country. A bit of a double-edged sword there, right? And it's all additive, as well as what I'd call the uncharted future that climate change is pointing us towards. So we have this complex system and a complex of actors, influences acting on it. So now feels like the time to ramp up our efforts for the restoration of the species and the ecosystem and build on success and efforts to date and acknowledge there have been successes. Joe talked about those in the Yellowstone ecosystem. Many other ecosystems have done independent, well-intended, high-value actions that maybe aren't connected yet, but we should build off of the good stuff we've already done. Efforts that you've all done individually as individuals, some of you as lone voices and lone actors taking independent actions, as well as at the district, the forest level, actions by tribes, by state agencies. Now's the time, if we look back on things we have done, we've developed and are outplanting some white pine blister rust resistant seedlings. There's some of that work going on. There's more work to do. We've done collection and protection of range-wide seeds or gene conservation in terms of just collecting all across the range. So we have a pool of resources to build from. We have some very robust in locations intentional prescribed burning and fire management programs. We have some inventory and monitoring of the ecosystems to understand the extent and range and complexity of the system. And we've had, and now we are at this summit and all the previous actions and meetings we've had, we have all that information to build on. So over the last year, American Forests, the Whitebark Pine Foundation, and the Forest Service came together to discuss and describe a new future that strengthens our collaborative efforts in partnership. And from that, we agreed to work together to develop a national strategic plan. And from that agreement and other efforts, this summit is one of those early steps down the road of heading to a new future. So I want to wrap this up in terms of just thanking you, all of you, for investing your time to attend the summit and help in building what I hope to be a durable restoration plan. A durable plan because we are all invested in the plan. We're invested in the reason and the logic for the plan. We're invested in the effort it's going to take to implement the plan. I look at it this way in terms of coming together in a multi-party conversation like this. I think I have a good understanding of what would happen if we stopped and went our separate ways. What I hope for is what will happen if we come together and strike up a robust conversation and invest in a plan, a durable plan, and take some collaborative actions. So just mull that over. You know, I think you individually could think about what would happen if you decided to leave now. Think about what would happen if you stay, and where will we end up? So I look forward to that challenge to all of you, and I'll walk. I won't look at the door as I walk back. So if you get up and leave, I won't know who you are. Think about that though in terms of staking out the future. I also want to acknowledge the planning committee. These kind of meetings don't happen by accident. So thank you to the planning committee for putting together a thoughtful couple days, including the field trip. And I look forward to seeing where we end up at the end of Thursday in terms of some course-changing strategy of where we can go with Whitebark pine restoration. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Joe. Your support for this has been critical. Let's move on. So Diana Tombach is here, Director of the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, to give us an updated version of Whitebark Pine 101.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. And my thanks to American Forests for great organization of this conference. Much appreciated. So with this first talk, it's actually geared to those people who are somewhat new to whitebark pine. Many of us have lived whitebark pine for quite a long time, but there's always some nuances and some facts that are helpful. Those of you, there are a few of you here who probably know already about everything I've said, and Alan actually did a great job of hitting some of the high points of what I'm about to talk to you about. But this is essentially Whitebark Pine 101, and it will put things in perspective. Let's begin. I don't know if we can lower the lights just a tad. If there's any way we can do that, it would be helpful. So I'd like to officially welcome you on behalf of the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation. We are actually based in Missoula, Montana. We have been advocating for whitebark pine since 2001. We are a nonprofit, science-based, dedicated to promoting the conservation and restoration of whitebark pine. Many of the founding members of the organization are pioneering whitebark pine researchers and managers. So please visit our table outside. We will have more information. And this is an ambitious presentation, so please hang on to your chairs as we try to get through this in the time allotted. I'm not going to go through all of the outline, but you can see we have a ways to go. By the way, I will attempt to indicate the locations that these pictures come from. I've tried to get pictures from across Whitebark Pines Range in honor of the folks that have traveled distances to be here. And by the way, we do have Canadians here too. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Whitebark pine does not stop at the U.S. boundary. All right, so whitebark pine across its range, just a little pictorial essay here. We have a youngish tree from Banff National Park, a millennial whitebark pine from the Wind Rivers, and there is a person next to it, just to give you a size comparison. Sad part about this whitebark pine, if you go up to it, it was hit by pine beetles. Just that same summer that I took the picture, there were pitch outs in the tree. And if you think about it, this tree has lived through several major pine beetle outbreaks, and it was the one in 2008 that got it. Or part of the recent outbreak that got it. An older tree from Crater Lake National Park, windswept, and from the Sierra Nevada, California. All right, things are changing in the taxonomic relations in whitebark pine. It's not what you probably learned in forestry school. We know it's in the family Pinaceae with the other pines in the genus Pinus and the subgenus Strobus. The white pines are soft pines. But there's a new section called Quinquefoliae, and this section has within it a new subsection Strobus. Whitebark pine formerly was in subsection Sembrae along with the other stone pines. They've all been merged along with strobus into the new subsection strobus under Cincifoliae. And the reason is relationships now are unclear. Stone pines are not necessarily their own nearest relatives. And with the advent of gene sequencing, confusion has arisen in that we really don't know relationships. In the words of the Howe et al. 2015 paper, these white pines have ancient and relatively recent intergressive hybridization events. Lots of hybridization, particularly in northeastern Asia and northwestern North America. Okay, so that's for the pine aficionados out there. Whitebark pine range. First of all, the species is restricted elevationally to forest zones in the upper subalpine and tree line. It's distributed through the western US and Canada, and it has the largest latitudinal distribution of any other five-needled white pine, ranging from the southern Sierra all the way up to 55 degrees in British Columbia and 54 degrees plus in the Canadian Rockies. It ranges in elevation from 900 meters in the north to about 3,600 meters in the south. Estimated aerial coverage of whitebark pine is about 6 million hectares based on estimates from Keene et al. 2012. That translates into over 14 million acres. Let's take a closer look at this distribution. All right, first of all, I'm going to show the whitebark pine distribution by Forest Service region, not implying that the Forest Service has jurisdiction over all this whitebark pine in these regions. We have embedded, obviously, BLM lands, Park Service, tribal lands, state lands, but just as a geographic marker. Here's the northern region, the range, Rocky Mountain region, Region 2, Region 4, Intermountain, Region 5, Pacific Southwest, Region 6, the Pacific Northwest. So by percentage, the northern region encompasses 48% of whitebark pine's range. The Rocky Mountain region encompasses 7%, Intermountain region 31%, Pacific Southwest 2%, but we love you, and the Pacific Northwest, Region 6, 12% of the range. Okay, now by jurisdiction. Okay, so the Forest Service, and by the way, I'll mention that all the wilderness areas across all jurisdictions have been carved out and placed into a separate category here called wilderness. All right, so Forest Service land, 47%, Park Service 10, Native American tribal lands and Bureau of Land Management lands together about 1% each. Private and state lands 3%, and here we have wilderness, 38% of whitebark pine's distribution. This is huge. Whitebark pine community types, they come in 3 flavors and they intergrade. This is not hard and fast. All right, so on favorable sites, we have successional communities, climax communities, and I'll talk more about the drivers of these, on exposed harsh sites, and then tree line communities on colder sites. So on productive sites, we have our successional communities, and whitebark pine is an early seral species. It comes in very early after disturbance. Basal area diminishes because of competition from shade-tolerant conifers. Some whitebark pine persists into late seral communities, and this is a green arrow here. I'm sorry it doesn't show up very well. And then it takes fire or other disturbance to renew this process, to renew the successional communities. Climax communities are self-replacing. They occur on extremely harsh sites with poor soils. They have continuous but sparse regeneration over time. Whitebark pine is a dominant or a co-dominant in these communities. And tree line, it's at the upper forest boundary. We call it the alpine tree line ecotone. Whitebark pine can occur in a mat-like form that we call crumholtz, or it can actually have some upright branches as well. And On dry, windswept slopes, whitebark pine is a dominant component of these tree-lined communities. These whitebark-dominated tree-lined communities are prevalent along the eastern slopes in the rain shadows, Rocky Mountains, Cascades, Sierra Nevada. And whitebark pine is often a tree island initiator. If we look at this picture, a whitebark pine will establish, it's hardy, it can handle the conditions, and tucked behind it we have a little subalpine fir sheltering. I'm also going to point out that whitebark pine, a tree line, is affected by blister rust, and here indeed is a tree that is dying as a result of blister rust. All right, Clark's nutcracker, and I studied nutcrackers for my doctoral work, came in sort of the back door on whitebark pine. This is a co-evolved mutualism, and far more important than perhaps we give it credit for. Whitebark pine is well adapted to its interaction with Clark's nutcracker. The tree has large wingless seeds. It does not need wings on its seeds because the nutcrackers provide the wings. The cones are closed, they stay closed, they're indehiscent, not serotinous, they just don't open. They lack the fibrous tissue that open the scales on other conifer cones. And what we have is a closed packet of energy waiting for nutcrackers to come along, and they will open the cones as you see on the trees here. So nutcrackers are well adapted for the interaction with whitebark pine. They actually have a throat pouch known as the sublingual pouch. They can carry actually up to 150 whitebark pine seeds, so quite capacious. Nutcrackers will bury caches or small clusters of 1 to 15 seeds throughout montane terrain. The seeds are buried under soil or gravel, just a few centimeters. Nutcrackers are good flyers. They will transport these seeds up to 32 kilometers away from where they harvested the seeds. This is based on radio tracking data from Teresa Lorenz, but we knew they could go far previously. Each individual bird in a good cone crop year can store from 35,000 to, it's been estimated, 98,000 whitebark pine seeds. And they retrieve these caches using a highly accurate spatial memory. So how do we get regeneration? Well, if nutcrackers have not gotten around to retrieving their caches by time we have snow melt and spring rain, the caches, the seeds can germinate. Unfortunately, nutcrackers do get preyed upon. If a bird dies, that leaves, what, 35,000 to 98,000 seed caches out there and available for germination. And nutcrackers don't forget the locations of their caches. Sublingual pouch. And I'm sorry, I must be a little nervous. I wonder why. So we can see the sublingual pouch, and I'll also point out that this bird is pink. And it's pink from contact with unripe whitebark pine cones. The anthocyanin pigments actually will discolor the feathers. And we can see that the structure of whitebark pine with its vertical branches, horizontally directed cones, act as landing platforms for the nutcrackers, and they are able to grip well as they're digging into these cones. Seed dispersal by nutcrackers actually determines the distribution of whitebark pine on the landscape. Where whitebark pine grows locally is a combination of nutcracker cast site selection and the environmental suitability of that site together. Nutcrackers actually cache in tundra. They store seeds above the current tree line, so as temperatures warm, we have an automatic rise in elevation of tree line with changing climate. Nutcrackers are very important in determining the growth form, the multi-trunk or clustered growth form of whitebark pine. In 1985, Jan Linhart and I did the genetic study that determined that in 70% of the cases, each individual in a cluster is a distinct genet. In other words, a different individual arising from seedlings from nutcracker caches. Nutcracker seed dispersal also determines the population structure at both fine scale, watershed, and regional scales of whitebark pine. Okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. Whitebark pine is a keystone species, and the definition of a keystone species is that it promotes biodiversity. Across that broad latitudinal range of whitebark pine, it occurs in a huge diversity of community types. And if you think of the different successional stages it can occur in as well, it represents incredible forest diversity. There's 7 recognized SAF cover types as well for whitebark pine. And whitebark grows at the highest elevations, and so it's providing wildlife habitat, shelter, nest sites. The seeds, of course, are very important as a wildlife food. So we know that a number of different songbirds will take whitebark pine seeds from cones, and other birds like woodpeckers and grouse will also feed on the seeds. Small mammals readily use whitebark pine seeds. The pine squirrels, both the Douglas squirrel of the Pacific distribution and the red squirrel, are voracious eaters of pine seeds. Large carnivores, we know that bears, and Alan mentioned that as well, are dependent or will use pine seeds if available from whitebark pine out of squirrel middens. Usually black bears will climb trees for them. Red fox have recently been discovered to eat whitebark pine seeds as well. And if you happen on bear scat in the fall, you'll often find little pieces of seed hulls in the scat. Whitebark pine communities are important wildlife habitat for all these species, even species that are rare, including the wolverine. I'm sorry you can't see this picture super well, but it's from a trail camera placed by Jake Myers, a student at Rocky Mountain College in Billings. So whitebark pine is also a foundation species, and this is a single species. The definition of foundation species technically is a single species that defines much of the structure of a community by creating locally stable conditions for other species and by modulating and stabilizing fundamental ecosystem processes. Whitebark pine defines ecosystem structure and function. It establishes early after disturbance. It mitigates harsh conditions so other conifers and other plants can establish around it. It's a nurse tree on harsh sites, especially for subalpine fir. And as we mentioned, it's a tree island initiator. So whitebark pine also provides ecosystem services that directly or indirectly benefit people. And we know that it grows up at the highest elevations, and these high elevation forest communities actually redistribute and retain snow, and they retain them through the summer months. The canopies actually shade the snow, the trunks shade the snow, and it slows summer snow melt, regulating downstream flow. The roots at these high elevations on unstable rocky slopes stabilize soil, and the presence of the trees alone stabilize snow, reducing avalanche hazard. And here are some pictures that we have taken in the course of our field work showing the snow redistribution in these tree-lined communities. This is on the Blackfeet Reservation, on Divide Mountain, whitebark pine-dominated tree-lined communities there. Wind River Mountains, Wyoming, up at the Christina Lake area, looking down, you can see all the snow patches in July persisting. All right, historical and spiritual significance. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that whitebark pine and Clark's nutcracker was not known to European settlers until the Lewis and Clark expedition. And it's September 6, 1805. By the way, the expedition at that point had split into two. Clark was leading an expedition through the Bitterroot, and they observed whitebark pine within a high elevation mixed coniferous forest as the men struggled to cross the Bitterroot Mountains into Idaho. In the journal, it's noted that 8 pines were observed. Clark called every conifer a pine. So we understand what he meant. August 22nd, 1805, Clark was the first to observe the Clark's nutcracker. He wrote a brief description, and I'm actually replicating it here, so the spelling is not mine. I saw today bird of the woodpecker kind, he got that wrong, which fed on pine burrs, its bill and tail white, the wings black, every other part of a light brown, and about the size of a robin. So you can't just blame the internet for spelling problems. In May 28th, 1806, Meriwether Lewis shot a nutcracker on the return trip. He described it in wonderful detail, by the way, if you haven't read it. And decades later, the specimen was formally named for Clark by Alexander Wilson. Okay, spiritual significance. We all know that trees have a powerful symbolism, and they are often regarded as the gateway between civilization and wilderness. So whitebark pine signifies stoicism, timelessness to visitors to our high elevations. There's traditional and cultural significance to whitebark pine as well, and this is part of ecosystem services. Native American First Nations, transboundary, US and Canada, used whitebark pine as a food source, those within the whitebark pine range. The seeds were used, and the inner bark was also used at certain times of the year as backup food. All right, status. Threats, status, and trends, and we have a picture here of the Custer gallatin with the mountain pine beetle just starting to impact trees. Very sad, beautiful whitebark pine community. You can see the trees fading here. The 4 major threats to whitebark pine. These are the 4 horsemen of whitebark pine, as I like to point out. Crenartium rubicula, the fungal pathogen that causes white pine blister rust, mountain pine beetle outbreaks, altered fire regimes causing successional replacement, climate warming. And climate warming has many impacts, driving bark beetle outbreaks, drought stress, mortality of older age classes, and larger, more frequent and severe fires are predicted. First, white pine blister rust in its exotic disease, now naturalized in North America. We have to accept that fact. It's not going away. Accidental introduction to the Northwest occurred around 1910. Cankers first detected on white pine in 1921. The conditions in the Pacific Northwest were a perfect storm for whitebark pine, for blister rust spread and the future for whitebark pine. Lots of white pine hosts, alternate hosts, ribes species, humid climate, moderate climate, and the rest is history, as we say. Blister rust continues to spread geographically and intensify locally, and it is now in regions once believed to be too harsh to support blister rust. And I'll point out that it is in the greater Yellowstone, it is a tree line, and it is at the northern edge in Canada of whitebark pine. The spread of blister rust is facilitated by wave years or favorable years for spores to spread. This is the distribution of white pine blister rust, thanks to Forest Health Protection here in the US, and I'll add that it was discovered in Utah, so we should add Utah here on ribes recently. Key points concerning white pine blister rust. All age classes are vulnerable, seedlings to mature trees. Cankers and branches or in the canopy kill the cone production and photosynthetic biomass, weakening trees. Cankers and stems kill trees. Whitebark pine populations are very susceptible. The frequency of genetic resistance varies greatly geographically. So it's not like people sat on their hands when blister rust came in. Efforts to control occurred early in the process through removal of the alternate host ribes. In 1916, the USDA Office of Blister Rust Control was created. It was later administered by the Forest Service. They banned cultivated currant first. By the way, the cost of ribes removal in 1916 was 42 cents an acre. Can you believe that? It's unbelievable. Federal funds to the control program allocated were $400,000 per year in then dollars from 1916 to 1939. Ribes control began in the West around 1924. There was a realization that the program was non-effective in the West by the 1940s. Yellowstone was among the last regions to apply control. And this was the most extensive disease control effort in American forestry. The total cost of the effort was about $100 million, or $150 million in 1994 dollars. We would like to have that today for whitebark pine. This is a little out of date. If anything, these estimates are low, but it's just a snapshot of where blister rust infection levels around the range of whitebark. So it's highest in the northern Rockies and over the border in the southern Canadian Rockies, and I'm being told it's closer, it's above 80% now in this area. It is lowest in the southern Sierra at this time, and not present yet in whitebark pine in the interior ranges of the Great Basin. In the greater Yellowstone, 25% is an average. It's as high as in the 80s in Grand Teton and Gallatin National Forest. Moving on to mountain pine beetle, 20-year outbreak. We've just coming down off that. Mountain pine beetle mortality has resulted in major losses of cone-bearing trees over 2 decades. The outbreak is still active. And let's actually look at figures here. So we have data from 1997 to 2016 here, aerial detection survey data. So this is cumulative. And I have to thank FHP for these data. Aerial detection survey data do not run every course, every path, every year. So these are underestimates of anything. So we can see that Idaho, Montana, Wyoming is the hardest hit, but Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada also have pine beetle mortality. Here's another view of it, maybe a little clearer with the topography. All right, some data. Here's the footprint. This is the total number of acres impacted by mountain pine beetle over the 20 years. Okay, and the highest, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Here's the time course of the mountain pine beetle outbreak. So California is the farthest behind here. That's in this color right here. Washington got hit early, and you can see that it's tailing off, except we've got California peaking later than other areas, 2014. Okay, and in the interest of time, I am trying to move along a little bit here. All right, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana all peaked together about 2009 to 2010, and we're tailing off except for a little bit of a blip here recently. Okay, fire exclusion leading to advancing succession. We've had aggressive fire exclusion since the early 20th century. These altered fire regimes have led to declining basal area of whitebark pine in a lot of successional communities, not everywhere, but in some parts of its range. And then climate change and whitebark pine. So I just want to point out that all the predictions for climate change and whitebark are very coarse scale. They're based on species distribution models, bioclimatic envelope models. They in a coarse scale predict whitebark pine moving upwards off the mountains and northwards out of the United States. Okay, we have to be very cautious in the interpretation of this because, by the way, we're looking at a figure that Marcus Warwell did for us. This is the Canadian border, the black line, and the red is 90% to 100% probability of whitebark pine occurrence. And you can see the red moves north, and by 2090 it's hard to see down in the US. But the fact is this is really an overstatement of what's going to happen to whitebark pine. We have cooler aspects. We have old trees that are able to withstand climate over time. This is probably a misinterpretation within the single lifespan of an individual tree that something like this is going to happen. But we need to consider climate change in our restoration actions. We can rely on resilience in established whitebark pine, but we need to find local refugia and make good use of genetic diversity to give whitebark pine the resilience to withstand climate change. Another important point about restoration is that nutcrackers will not come if cone crops decline, if trees are unhealthy and you have lower cone production. If you have low cone production, you have just a few trees producing cones, and they are targeted by squirrels and pre-dispersal seed predation by nutcrackers. Combined work by Sean McKinney and Berenger et al. Combined data indicates that the probability of nutcracker visitation to withstand declines under about 1,000 cones per hectare. This should not be used as a prescription for stands. This has to be looked at the landscape level. If there's a good producing stand nearby, you'll get nutcrackers. And notice that even with zero cone production, nutcrackers come. It's just the probability of them coming declines. But we have to keep in mind that nutcrackers will not be able to spread the seeds from the few resistant trees remaining. Those seeds will be eaten readily by squirrels and birds. All right, so what do we stand to lose? So we're on the wrap up here. Whitebark pine, the high elevation keystone and foundation species, is declining rapidly from a convergence of threats. There is no evidence to indicate that in the few areas where whitebark pine is relatively healthy, it will stay healthy. White pine blister rust is spreading, and that's a fact. The loss of whitebark pine has immense implications for our high elevation biodiversity and ecosystem services and our country's natural heritage. In July 2011, whitebark pine was named a candidate species for listing under the Endangered Species Act. In June 2012, it was listed as endangered in Canada under the Species at Risk Act. There's hope, though, whitebark pine restoration. And we know we can speed up natural selection by developing and planting blister rust resistant seedlings. We can protect against mountain pine beetle attack. We can reset succession, and we can mitigate, to the best of our knowledge, climate change. So that brings us full circle to the National Whitebark Pine Restoration Plan. So the overarching goal of whitebark pine conservation and restoration is to develop and sustain healthy and resilient whitebark pine communities in the face of current and future challenges. And the fact is, we have the knowledge and the tools. This restoration plan is going to take more than a year to assemble, but it can provide a blueprint for restoration that accommodates change and new information, and it can guide restoration until the job is done. And we'll be talking more about the nuts and bolts of this. So along with the program, there was an insert, and I'm pulling two quotes out from that insert, which is the Best Management Practices Guidelines for Whitebark. Carnartium rubicola is potentially the most persistent and widely distributed threat to whitebark pine populations, affecting all age classes. And the combination of white pine blister rust and mountain pine beetle reduces seed production. It kills resistant trees and accelerates population losses. And then, in stands where genetic resistance has increased through planting, direct seed sowing, or natural regeneration, and trees reach maturity, we are banking on the nutcrackers to spread this resistance by caching seeds in adjacent areas and to distances as great as 30 kilometers, moving resistance 30 kilometers at a time across the range of whitebark pine. This concept is fundamental to devising a core area restoration plan. So thank you for your patience. I'd like to thank a few people, Greg Danita and Elisa Ingegno, Janine Paschke, Bob Keene, Monty Retzlaff for help with data, and then Leslie Weldon, David Guazi, and others in the Washington office for support of the National Restoration Plan concept. Board members of the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, if you're here, would you raise your hand just so people can see who you are? Thank you, scattered around the room. and many research colleagues and students over the years, and to all of you, thanks especially for being here and for your support of Whitebark Pine. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thanks. So Amy Nicholas's job is to track these 4 horsemen and to assess their impacts on the Whitebark pine and the communities. She'll be here this morning to talk to us about their process of now reviewing the current status review for Whitebark pine. Welcome, Amy.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and say this right off the bat. I've been on 6 planes in the last few days. I woke up this morning, I have a terrible cold, so I'm going to try not to cough during this, but I can't guarantee anything, okay? So, as we were saying, this is Whitebark Pine and ESA, so I'm going to just really quickly, this is going to be quick and dirty, but I'll be here all week, or till Thursday, and any questions. Whitebark Pine, where are we at, what's the process, and what is our time frame? And how do I have a clicky thing? Oh. Just to get us all on the same page, here's where we are. Previous federal actions under for Whitebark pine in the U.S. So in 1991, that was the first time we were petitioned to list the species. At that time, the petitioners did not present substantial information, so we said no. 2008, we were petitioned again, and the petitioners did provide substantial information that led us to believe we would need to look at Whitebark pine closer. So that closer look is a 12-month finding, so we really get into the weeds in a 12-month finding. We did a 12-month finding that was published in 2011. We determined that, yes, Whitebark pine was warranted to be listed, but it was precluded by other higher listing priorities. So it became a candidate. It's still a candidate right now, but when it's a candidate, every year we would do a candidate notice of review, right? So we're keeping our finger on the pulse. What is the status of the species? But in 2016, the Fish and Wildlife Service, because we have a huge workload, as you can imagine, we came up with a 7-year work plan. In that work plan, Whitebark pine, of course, was a big player. So in 2017, we began a species status assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But in our listing work plan, 2019, that's where a decision's going to be made. Either we're going to be proposing to list the species or it'll be withdrawn from the candidate list. So most of you are probably aware of this. We've got our listing process, and this is under the ESA, again, that 12-month finding that we look substantially in what's impacting the species. It's a 5-factor analysis. It's required under the ESA. We're still going to be doing that. That's what's going to be published in 2019. The 5-factor analysis, probably most of you are aware, 5 factors. The first factor is factor A, so what is out there impacting the species, habitat modification, destruction, curtailment. Factor B is overutilization, which isn't really a problem for whitebark, except some parts of Canada, I guess. Factor C is disease and predation, which for whitebark pine plays a big role in what we're seeing. Factor D is inadequacy of regulatory mechanisms. And factor E is kind of a catch-all. It's other man-made threats. So this is the decision document under the ESA, and we're definitely going to be addressing this in 2019. But the service has come up with a new process now. This is going to apply to all the species that we've been petitioned for. It's called a species status assessment, and that's what we're in the midst of doing right now with whitebark pine. This document is a central document. It's going to be used to inform all decisions and activities under the ESA. And so it could be 5-year recovery plans, that kind of thing, but of course, for the case here with whitebark pine, it's going to be informing the listing decision. It provides no regulatory interpretation of data at all. So this is just about the science. And again, it's going to inform the decision makers. The important, and I'm going to do this again at a 30,000 foot level, and some of you that were at the Whitefish meeting have already heard some of this. But the SSA process, we're assessing the viability of the population or the species. And we're not looking, is it viable or inviable, but there's different levels of viability and what drives the viability up or down for whitebark pine. It's based on conservation biology principles, the 3 R's. So it's resistance, resiliency, and redundancy. Basically, what these 3 R's do is we're asking the question, it's a measurement of how many populations do you have? How big are the populations? How much genetic diversity, ecological diversity, and for whitebark pine, even morphological diversity, what Diana was talking about with the multi-stem or not, or the crumholts and all of that. So we're asking all these questions. How far is it spread, distributed? How healthy is it? This tells us how able is this species able to tolerate not only daily stressors of things that are going on, but also able to withstand or come back from stochastic or catastrophic events. So just really basically here we're going to look at species needs at the individual level, at the population level, and at the species level. And then we go on to the current species conditions. And then we also have this thing at the end, the future conditions, which is really important for listing. Where do we think this is going? Now, as I just said, excuse me, a lot of this has to do with populations, right? Like how are the populations okay? And you roll that all up into what's happening with the species. As you can imagine, for whitebark pine, we're looking range-wide, so we're including Canada. What is a population? How do we even define that? For whitebark pine on a range-wide level, that'd be pretty tough, right? So what we've done, and some of you have definitely seen this, because I asked your expert opinion on this, we have parceled this out into analysis units. These analysis units are based on the EPA ecosystem analysis units. That's the basis behind this. But then we talked to some of the experts out here, many of you commented on this. So we made some tweaks. Now this is a draft, but this is kind of the basis of what our analysis units are going to be instead of populations. So here's our timeline. So the things I've highlighted in yellow here, this is kind of where we've been in the recent history of all this. So in December was kind of our kickoff for the SSA, putting that all together. And we had got together an internal core team. So this Fish and Wildlife Service folks, some of you are here. Can you raise your hand? I don't know. Okay, at least 2 of you. I don't know where. Oh, there you are. This is the first time I've actually got to see these people in person, so that's great. So there's the core team, and then we moved on to our data call letters, which I'm sure most of you have seen those, and provided information. Thank you so much. Then we conducted a literature review. We combined all that data, and you guys are prolific. You got a lot of data out there. And then we started putting together a conceptual model. We had an expert meeting, and a lot of you were involved in that, to look at our conceptual model. Are we capturing what's really happening with whitebark pine? That conceptual model is going to be a part of a quantitative model that we're putting together right now. As I said before, we got to come up with some future scenarios. If things continue as they are, what's that going to look like? If they get worse, what's that going to look like? You know, status quo. We're going to give our decision makers, here's some scenarios that we think are probable, not probable, etc. That's what's going into that quantitative modeling effort. USGS is helping us out with that. we're still in the midst of that right now, and it's definitely no easy task. In December, we are hoping to have, or at least I'm really hoping, we're going to have a draft SSA report that's going to go out to my core team back there. They're going to review everything as it's been put together. I'll get comments back from them, revise that document based on their comments, and then we're going to move into February. I'm hoping February 2018. And we were going to send this out for external review. Because this isn't a decision document, we can send it out to the wider group. So we're going to have, and we still haven't decided, but at least 3 identified peer review folks. But we're also going to send it out to partners, everyone that's worked on this. So it's I'm a little scared about this because this is a big group, and whoever wants to comment, you know, I'm going to get back all of those comments and have to revise things based on that. Then, so that's the biology, that's what's going into the SSA, which will inform the decision document, like I said. Then we go into this next stage. So this is the policy decision-making phase. And so in the spring of 2018, we are going to have a recommendation team meeting, and we've kind of split this up into a pre-recommendation. So I'm going to have a bunch of big dogs, like my boss, Tyler Abbott, back there, who's the lead for Wyoming. Raise your hand, Tyler. So he'll be at that meeting reading the SSA. Him and his cohorts are going to make a recommendation to our regional directors. And because Whitebark Pine's so widely spread, there's going to be 3 regional directors from Region 1, 6, and 8, sorry, California. So that's when the decision will be made in the spring. But even though that decision's made, there's still a lot of steps. So if it gets listed, we're going to have to determine whether we can or should identify critical habitat. If it's not listed, there's still a lot of other steps that need to be taken. A review and surname process. Most of you work for the government, you know things are not easy. You got to go through a lot of steps, right? So a review and surname process, and then we get through all of that, and the targeted delivery date to the Federal Register in spring, and I'm hoping March of 2019, whether it's going to be listed or not. So that's kind of where we are right now. And I just wanted to say, and again, that was quick and dirty, but I wanted to say before I wrap up here, I just am so impressed by this group here. Great group of people, great science. What you guys are attempting to do here is amazing. Listing is just kind of a blip on the radar. It's really important. Listing's important. But what you guys are attempting to do is long-term conservation. So if the species gets listed, sure, this is going to, what you're doing here is going to provide an excellent foundation for recovery, which is the goal for all of us. But if it's not listed, what you're doing here is going to keep it from being listed in the future, because I think we can all agree, whether it's listed or not, it's got some problems, definitely. So that was it for me. So if anyone has any questions now, I'm happy to answer, and if not, I'll definitely be here in the next few days and we can chat.
So next on the agenda, Diana and Bob are going to do a brief overview of the plan and vision process. We'll jump into a lot more detail in the next couple of days, but it's an important part of the process. Just describe what this plan will look like and what the next steps should be. So Diana?
All right, so this is a little bit of detail, but tomorrow we're really going to tackle the nitty-gritty of what the process will entail. Today, we want to just give you a brief overview of the National Whitebark Pine Restoration Plan. our approach and our vision. In other words, the products we expect out of the plan. All right, so you've heard the rationale. I'd hope maybe you'd have a coffee break, and this would serve as a reminder. You're aware that whitebark health in many parts of its range is deteriorating rapidly. And whitebark, as we've heard, is suffering from an unprecedented combination of threats, a perfect storm, actually, and it requires timely management intervention. The problem is restoration of whitebark, given the extent of its range, poses real logistical and fiscal challenges. And we're also operating in a time of budgetary constraints. So these challenges require a strategic approach to restoration, and we're choosing an approach that carves out parts of the whitebark pine range and targeting these parts, basically, for restoration. We're calling these designated core areas, and they will have the highest priority for restoration action. So American Forests, to give you a little of the backstory, Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation and the U.S. Forest Service put our heads together to partner to develop this core area restoration plan for the U.S. distribution of whitebark pine. We actually approached the Washington office and Leslie Weldon and David Guazi with this idea. The collaboration we're talking about is not just the three entities I've mentioned, it's everybody. We're extending this collaboration to all federal and state agencies and tribes with whitebark pine under their jurisdiction. And basically this plan will identify these selected areas or core areas and use them as our first restoration priority, focusing resources. And let me hastily say that restoration can occur outside these core areas. No one would ever put a block on restoration and where various agencies and groups would want to restore. But we're just suggesting that we target these core areas for efficiency. So here are the components to this National Restoration Plan. So first of all, this plan is a geographic plan. It is essentially a GIS layer. And it's depicting nominated core areas for each administrative jurisdiction, whether it's state or federal, within tribal, within different agencies, and it's going to be based on agency-specific criteria. We will recommend criteria, and as a matter of fact, Melissa Jenkins is presenting a talk where she talks about the array of criteria that people can use for picking their core areas. But we purposely want this to come from the grassroots up, to bubble up. So these core areas that will be nominated will represent, we're targeting 20% to 30% of the whitebark pine distribution in any administrative unit. Administrative unit we're defining right now as a national forest, a national park, a state, say for BLM, or state agencies and tribal lands for each tribe. The core areas nominated will have a priority ranking of 1 through 3. Where do you want to go first, second, third? And for each administrative unit or jurisdiction, we need to know what criteria you used for our narrative, for our report, and we would like you to, knowing the health status of whitebark within these areas, assign a restoration protocol tentatively to the nominated core area, and we can help with that. And we are also going to present tomorrow. Ellen Youngt and I are tag teaming on a talk. We will present a range of costs. We've actually done some research on these, and we'll talk about them for implementation of restoration protocols. And for each unit, we want a monitoring and adaptive management sub-strategy, because these things cannot be one-offs. We need to actually go out and see how successful they are. People may need to plant and then come back and plant again. There could be wildfire, things can happen. So we need to make sure that the priority areas are being restored. Overview of the process we went through, and then I can go into this in a bit more detail. By the way, I'm taking the bulk of this talk. Bob will pretty much have most of the talk tomorrow, where we get into the nitty-gritty on how it's going to be done. All right, so we started this off with collaborative engagement. David Guazi facilitated this at the Washington office, along with American Forests, and we helped as well at the foundation. We gathered lists of people involved at the Washington level and throughout the distribution of whitebark pine, people responsible, and letters went out from the Washington office announcing the rollout of this plan. The Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, meanwhile, developed an online survey. We've had good response, but we could have better. And Julie Shamhart, our executive staffer, will be talking about the results. The online survey was to determine gaps in information, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. We convened Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation taking the lead, a best management practices teleconference, and a number of experts in whitebark pine restoration participated, and we produced, we had an initial document going in. It's revised based on feedback. We'll probably have another round by the way of reviews after this, but this should be in everyone's program. It's an insert, okay, and you can look at that. We took the lead as a foundation, partnered with American Forests in teleconferences with the regional personnel and with the National Park Service. And if any other group would like to have a conference whereby we talk about what you know and what you're doing with whitebark and what your issues might be, and we can help clarify, please let us know. You can contact either me through the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation or email through our website directly, but we're happy to arrange one. And then here we are at the National Summit. And at the end of the summit, we have the official kickoff of the call for data, and we're going to be putting our heads together and drafting a very detailed letter that will go out to everyone and specify what we would like to have from each jurisdiction. And as this is in process and people have received their letters and they're mulling this over and thinking about this, we have another teleconference core area workshop planned where people who need help or have questions or need feedback or want to bounce something off us can interact with us. It will be very informal, and we'll probably set this up sometime in early winter. Okay, so we're working on organizing that. And then we will have a deadline, and we'll talk more about deadlines tomorrow. There's plenty of time, but we then start assembling the data into a massive GIS. And we also are hoping that those entities, agencies, jurisdictions, tribes that may have a gap in knowledge about health status or where their whitebark is might use the 2018 field season to plug some of those holes. And if there's a resource problem, let's talk about it. Not that we're not really a foundation with Bill Gates's fortune, but maybe there's some way we can convey your needs and figure out how we can plug some of those holes. So we would be inclined to take some data late if it's not an overwhelming amount after the field season. And so we will be assembling the draft plan report all next fall and have the draft available at the end, basically, of 2018, and then worry about review, et cetera, in 2019 in a final version. Components to the plan, what's in the plan. So we have the big GIS, the maps, the nominated core areas, priority designation within each nominated area, the criteria used to identify the core areas, proposed restoration actions for the areas, implementation costs. So we can basically price out Whitebark pine restoration for this core area plan. We actually will know what this will cost. And then we want monitoring adaptive management strategies. We need to have follow-up. All right, so now we get into the weeds, and I don't want to go through these slides blow by blow, but I want to elaborate on some of the process here. So the kickoff letter went out of the Washington office to all the federal agencies, the tribal governments, state agencies, briefly overviewing the process and the timetable. So the online survey is up. It only takes about 12 to 15 minutes to get through. Most of your answers are yes, no, maybe, and it's a drop-down menu. It's not onerous, and if you haven't taken it, and if you're still interested in taking it, please email us, and we can send you the link and give you access to that. It would be nice to have a little bit more response, but we have about 70 respondents, which is good. Okay, so the Best Management Practices Workshop occurred at the end of August this past summer, and we had a go-to meeting and basically got feedback on a number of the major protocols that are used for whitebark pine restoration, and as I mentioned, they're a handout, part of your materials. We'll talk a little bit more about that. These best management practices will end up in the restoration plan as a chapter, most likely, but we may actually think about developing them even further down the road as an independent document, so more on that later. And then the regional discussion groups were really informative. We really appreciated the folks out of the regional offices and the National Park Service who participated. We learned an awful lot. We learned who had good distributional information, who had health information, what people were doing for whitebark pine, and it kind of gave us a little heads up on the work that is cut out for us in terms of what the gaps are in that information. And as I said, if there are other groups out there, we did not, for example, talk as a group to the BLM, and we'd be willing to do that. And if we have some interest from one of the tribes, we'd be happy to do that as well, or all of them. We'd be very pleased. All right, so here we are in progress with the National Summit, and the major emphasis is the rationale and conceptual basis for the strategic plan. Very happy that Amy Nicholas told us that this plan would be very helpful if whitebark pine is listed, and we know if it's not listed, we still have to do this because whitebark pine is in trouble. Okay, and after the summit, then formal request, we're sort of targeting just before the holidays, early December actually, for that. And then this teleconference that we're planning in winter to troubleshoot any issues, problems, so something to think about, so we can help folks if they are having any difficulties or encountering any problems or with criteria, or if there's any way we can help sort things out. We're very happy to do that. All right, the Phase 4 Compile National Restoration Plan. We will be working on the GIS, and by the way, Bob Keene is our Forest Service partner, and he and Julie Shamhart, Foundation staffer, and some help from American Forests, Justin Heinecke, our projector master here, also has great GIS capabilities, and we'll be all putting our heads together to integrate this information as it's received. And the final plan will be reviewed by all partners, and their comments integrated. All right, so our plan now is to present the draft to the leadership in December 2018. This is assuming no major bumps in the highway here. What's really important is to realize that this is not the end point. This is not the end game. In a way, this plan is the start of whitebark pine restoration. Not in a way. We know there's been a lot of restoration that's been done through the years, but focused restoration and throughout its range. And even if some of the major problems we discussed are not impacting an area hugely, there are things that can be done to give whitebark pine resilience when these problems hit. All right, so having the plan in hand, we hope to present it to many of the participants from the Leadership Summit here today, maybe not everybody, but a number of the participants. And then we need to implement the plan. We need to begin conversations about funding and devising an implementation plan at that point. Okay, and there will be some conversations about that later. Okay, so final products quickly, and then I'll turn this over to Bob. We know we've got the best management practices summary that will be beefed up some. The National Whitebark Pine Restoration Plan will be published as a U.S. Forest Service General Technical Report. There will be a parallel summary for public outreach written by American Forests. And these products should provide the basis for restoration planning, for outreaching to corporate sponsors and the public. It's going to be the strategic plan that we're hoping federal, state agencies, tribal jurisdictions then will carry out, and we will help in terms of fundraising. So the products signal the beginning of restoration work. And restoration is going to keep us all very, very busy supporting restoration for a long, long time. So these final products are just the beginning of the real work here. All right, Bob, turning it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Bob Keene. I work for the Rocky Mountain Research Station right here at the Missoula Fire Sciences Lab. I want to apologize profusely for the ponderosa pine cones and foliage that are on the table, and especially for the cedar that's on there. We did that for Terry Jane, so she would be happy. But we did have ponderosa whitebark pine cones, but Mary Frances needed it for some rescue screening trials, so she came and took them all this morning. So, at any rate, you're probably wondering how in the heck we're going to do all this and do it right. And so, as Diana said, we're looking at a major deliverable of the prioritization of areas for restoration on multiple scales. And to do this, we need scientifically credible methods and data in order to do it. And I'm your Forest Service contact for that part of the issue. I want to emphasize that this is going to be a totally different prioritization than has gone on in the past in government agencies, in that instead of us taking a top-down approach and deciding on which stands to treat or which landscapes to treat, you are going to be charged with nominating your core areas to us. And then what we're going to be doing at the national level when we develop the plan is collecting the spatial data and so on that we can provide contacts to your selections. So these databases that I'm going to be talking about today are going to be used not only by us to provide context for your selections, but also you can use them to do your analysis for your core areas in the future. And so the database is going to actually be composed of spatial data and non-spatial data that are going to be integrated together through modeling and statistical analysis programs. And in order to do that, what we're going to go and we're going to steal every existing possible data layer that's available. We're going to steal Steve Brown's Northern Region whitebark pine potential and existing maps. We're going to do everything. I've already got a ton of data that I've already collected already, and we're going to put all that and create what is effectively a national whitebark pine GIS layer. Then we're going to go out and we're going to collect all the existing field data, and I'm going to talk about a lot more of this tomorrow, and then we're going to integrate them through some complex statistical analyses to create other data layers that people need. For instance, we probably need to create a data layer at a kilometer scale for rust infection levels and rust mortality levels. And then we're also going to be modeling some plot data, calculating things from existing plots that we need in other particular programs like assigning climate and so on, so we can assess climate change impacts. So that is essentially what the database will be. It'll be delivered in this form, and it'll be resident on a cloud site that everybody will have access to and download them and use them as you see fit. A lot of people are wondering exactly, the problems that we're going to have is that for the database, both the plot and the range-wide database, is that it has to be wall-to-wall for us. We're going to get your nominations coming up from below, but in order to summarize it at various scales of analysis, we actually need wall-to-wall data layers for everything. And so right now, all the map resolutions that we have are a kilometer or 30 meters in some cases, and we're going to be stitching all these maps together to create maps like where the whitebark pine are now and where the potential lands are to actually do restoration, both now and in the future. And then what we're thinking is that the analysis unit at the core scale will be a landscape. It'll be a 6-code huck. Those are 10,000 to 30,000 acre landscapes that we'll use to summarize down for a particular forest. And that will be the lowest level that we'll be able to deal with in the GIS. We're thinking we'll have GIS layers that will be 1 kilometer or 30 meters, but we think the most accurate summary of those will be at a landscape scale or the 6-code huck scale. That will then summarize up from the 6-code hucks up to districts, to national forests and parks, up to the region and across the entire range. Some of the existing data that we'll use will be climate data layers. It'll be existing model layers. We probably won't include Canada, but we'll try like heck to make sure that Canada is represented in this. We'll surely include all the data layers that Shannon Blackadder did for the Crown of the Continent and so on, and hopefully we'll have a data resource that everybody can use. I guess we can skip that. So in the end, we also are going to be using the EMDS product that's developed out of the PNW by Keith Reynolds. And EMDS allows us to provide a tool for you to use and for us to use to go ahead and see what landscapes are important for your particular regions and landscapes. And so EMDS is a totally transparent process. You can weight your decisions based on whether or not you want to emphasize succession or whether or not you want to emphasize bare habitat or so on. And we'll have that EMDS as a support for you and for us so that we can have a transparent process in order to prioritize landscapes into the future. But I want to emphasize that it is your promotions of your own landscapes that will drive this process. And so we're looking at you and your selection of what landscapes or stands that you want to treat or put in this process that will be what the national prioritization will be. And that's about all I had. If there's any questions, or what do you want to do, Eric?
Any broad level questions? As Bob and Diana mentioned, we'll go way more in detail, but there are 30 key broad level questions. Sure.
I just wondered, could you put your last slide up there again so we can get that buzz address? Thank you.
Okay. Sounds of silence.
For the restoration plan, what was the decision for that 28 to 30% figure for each core area? Why was that percentage basis?
We didn't do any modeling. It was just trying to figure out what would be an adequate amount to substantially help whitebark pines range, and yet be something that is a target fiscally that might be possible. So we really don't have any modeling basis to that 20 or 30%, but it was an outgrowth of discussions that we had along with the Washington office folks, and we feel that it's a reasonable target. Having said that, there's a lot of flex in that number, but in terms of what people can actually do, boots on the ground. We didn't want to have a target that was so high that we weren't going to be able to meet it, and we feel that 20 to 30% is substantial enough, given that there's whitebark pine outside of that area, that we can really make a dent in resiliency and survival. So frankly, it was just a guesstimate. And if people have feedback about that, we'd appreciate it, but anything less I'd worry about. Anything more, it's going to be hard to get that done. So it's a balance. Okay, thank you.
Any more? Let's break. Good sessions this morning. I think we're off to a good start.